Okay, it says I'm now live on YouTube and also live with all of our friends on Zoom. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hey, everybody, welcome to Tech Talks. I see some faces in our Zoom room that we don't see live very often. So that's awesome. I'm excited about that. Today's topic is ChatGPT. And if you are here, it's probably because you've heard many people talking about this. There have been lots of articles on places like Inside Higher Ed and on lots of teacher blogs and online communities, and probably in some of your departments have already been talking about this. Because of all the demand to talk about this and to get some support and ideas about how to deal with this, we aren't just doing the one tech talk. We're going to have, in addition to today, we're also going to have our first workshop tomorrow, which the details are in our newsletter. It's both in person on both campuses and on Zoom. So one way or the other, hopefully you're able to make it if your schedule allows. And then we're going to have 2 more workshops later in the month. So this is going to be the first kind of the basic introduction to a much longer conversation, because there's a lot of different things to talk about here, both technology-wise, teaching and pedagogy-wise, philosophically. There's a lot to unpack on this, and we won't get to all that today. This is just kind of the teaser session, sort of. Okay, so let me look at my notes here. I wanted to talk about what is ChatGPT and where does it come from. So the GPT in ChatGPT stands for generative pre-trained, which basically means it is a generative AI, meaning it can generate something, in this case, text. And pre-trained means it is trained on a vast library of literally billions of text samples. I looked it up on their website, and some of the text comes from a vast library of digitized books. So they have a lot of literature and book content in their training. It also has the entirety of Wikipedia, so anything that's on there is part of their training set, and also just a vast web crawl of content from the internet. And all those things combined produces something like 175 billion samples that it uses. So that's what it thinks of. That's where it gets the content of, this is what text looks like. This is what a sentence looks like. These are how the words put together. And Nick and Melody, you were doing way more on the technical side than I was today. So if I get any of that wrong, correct me. But basically, if you give it a prompt, it will use that library's worth of knowledge to say, based on this prompt, statistically, I think that these words are related to that prompt. And this is how I would put a sentence together. And then this is how I would put the next sentence together until it generates a paragraph or a couple paragraphs or a page worth of text. Is that like the super layman's terms answer to that?
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we already got some chat going on here, so. Yes, we are going to try to record parts of the workshops. We're not going to be able to record all of it because part of it will be breakout rooms and you can't record those, but we'll try to share as much of that out as possible. That's a great question. Okay, so ChatGPT is created by a company called OpenAI, which does a lot of this AI stuff. Something that I find pretty interesting about that is Microsoft has invested a huge amount of money. Do you remember the number?
Initially, it was something like 10 billion in the actual infrastructure to kind of run this program. So the servers that are actually.
So Microsoft is hosting the machinery behind the scenes and also invested billions of dollars in this. And they've also, the CEO of Microsoft has explicitly said in interviews, they are working on integrating this tool into their services in the near future. So I suspect that by the end of the year, probably either built into Microsoft Word or as a separate function in Office 365, we're going to have a lot of these tools that are at disposal that way, and it's going to be extremely accessible to virtually everybody. That's my guess. We'll see what happens, but one way or the other, it's not going away, right? I think probably what we wanted to do is actually share and show what it looks like and show what some of the prompts look like, just to get a sense of what it's capable of. And then also some prompts that it's not so good at answering. And that's probably about all we have time for today. And then hopefully that will give you an appetite for more. Does that sound
Sounds great.
right?
Sounds good to me.
Let me share my screen, and I'm going to share this window here, which should have, okay, that's got my ChatGPT. Give me a second to rearrange some windows.
While Caleb's doing that, just this is essentially what we're seeing students using this essentially this user interface. This is a research version of ChatGPT, so it's not like it's a paid service quite yet. Something to always consider, and we'll talk about that probably more tomorrow. But this is how we're seeing students use it, and even some faculty as they kind of design stuff with this tool. But this isn't probably the end be all end all, right? This will probably change pretty drastically as it becomes commercialized.
I think that's probably right. But this is what it looks like right now, and basically this line right here is almost the entire interface as far as most users are concerned. It's like a chat window. It's like you're chatting with another person, sort of. So you would enter a prompt, and based on that prompt, it's going to write something back to you. You can just have like a simple conversation with it, and some people really enjoy that and they feel like they're talking to a real person. But for our purposes, what I think is more interesting is you can prompt it to write pretty large pieces of text based on academic prompts and that sort of thing. So let's just put something in here and see what it does. What do you think would be a good first prompt to share with it? I've got a few on my side here, maybe one of my media literacy ones, or I'm just trying to think of what would be a good prompt.
Or we could ask our faculty in the audience if they have a question they want to ask it, since
That's a great idea. Does anybody have a short, simple writing assignment prompt that you use in your class that you want to enter in this and see what it does?
even a question a student might want to answer.
Yeah. No pressure if you don't want to. You know, we might not want to discover what it does in front of everybody.
Oh, see, Barb's
Got one. Respond to the movie Tar. So Barb, that's a great one because it won't be able to do that because again, when we said it's pre-trained, it's trained on content that was entered into the system. And I think the last time it had that content was 2021.
Yeah,
I mean, let's try it and see what it does.
Yeah.
Summarize the movie Tar. Tar is a movie. So it's giving us super vague. Okay, a movie whose name and specific details are not likely to be known, as there are multiple films and works of art. I go over that title. So one of the things that's interesting about this is you can have a back and forth with it. It's not just one prompt and then see what it does. It's asking for more. Was that 2022 or 2023 that came out? I think 2022.
So Barb, what do you mean by can it respond? Like specifically, what kind of answer are you looking for?
Well, here's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering how good this chat thing is going to be at the kind of, like, if I ask my film students, watch this movie and give me your response.
Mhm.
I know that it can summarize it because that's objective, but response is a very subjective thing, right? And so I'm wondering if the chat can mimic the response function, which is, I guess I'm asking, can it be more reflective? Or does it only just regurgitate like facts?
Right. So let's pick a movie that would be an older movie that would be within its range. I don't know.
Try Wizard of Oz. Try
Sure.
Wizard of Oz. We all know that one.
What is your response to the movie Wizard of Oz? So it's going to take some time to think about this. It's processing this request on the back end. Sometimes that can be fast, sometimes that can be slow based on how busy their system is.
You're like,
It's a lot.
B.
All right, so here it comes. It's a classic fantasy film released in 1939.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's going to try to summarize it. It's going to give you sort of the Wikipedia sort of definition.
Mhm.
Right.
So let's stop that generation and let me say,
For more,
Try reflect. Because Barb said something about that.
yeah,
Or what
I
were you gonna
think.
say, Melanie?
I was gonna say more specific, about the word response. If you
Yeah.
could give us more-
What did you find surprising about the film The Wizard of Oz?
Ooh, good one.
So that's interesting. It'll say, well, so first it'll put a disclaimer on there. As an AI language model, I don't have emotions or personal experiences, so I can't find anything surprising. However, then it's still gonna try to answer this. In this case, it's still a very summary-based response. Widely considered groundbreaking, influential. Many aspects like the color palette, is iconic and widely recognized. The film's themes of friendship. So it is not giving you a very personalized response to that kind of question, which is.
Okay, so one of the things that we can think about then is asking students to think about their own learning and their own relationship to learning in whatever context we have is
Yes.
one way that we can make sure that they are thinking more on their own than generating AI responses.
Absolutely. So like, as you noted, it is pretty good at giving a summary of something. So we probably shouldn't be asking students to summarize a book or a movie or a historical event, because ChatGPT can do that pretty well. But if you can personalize it in some way, what was your opinion of this story? What did you find emotionally surprising, or what did anything in this make you angry or sad or happy or made you laugh? It can't give you useful responses for that kind of question. So that's a good one.
Well, and that does speak to kind of just general academic integrity issues. If you're being asked to summarize, that's what's been on the web for years, like people just posting their answers or things like that were very general that could then be used by any student. And I mean, this kind of speaks to authentic assessment, which was kind of been in our tool belt, our back pocket for, I guess, for a while now as our main tool against academic integrity issues.
But Ben made a good point in the chat. He's seen it can personify a response if you give it the right kind of prompt. So I'll give an example of one that I tested out. This was quite a while ago. I tested this one, so I don't know what it's going to do. But
while you type that, I did see someone said that they had a student used it for a programming assignment. One of the earliest uses of this, or the first kind of ways it's been trained, is to process natural language into computer code. So it actually does a really good job of like, I'm trying to do this with JavaScript, and then it'll go, oh, well, maybe you could try this. And then you kind of like do this iterative process, and it's kind of like having your own programming coach.
Yeah.
And it works really well for kind of stuff like that. It's very iterative.
yeah. All right. So I'm going to put in a prompt, write a personal narrative about going to college from the perspective of a first generation student from rural Montana, which is it. That's me. That's what I am. So when you give it that kind of prompt, it will generate what sounds like a personal narrative. Growing up in rural Montana, I always know I wanted to go to college. My parents never had the opportunity to attend, and I wanted to be the first in my family to break that cycle. Despite the needs and costs, I was determined to make it happen. So I mean, this isn't bad as a personal narrative. It's all fictitious. It's just hallucinated out of nothing, basically, based on what ChatGPT already understands personal narratives to look like, right?
Mhm.
But it's not my story. But if I were a student and I was given a prompt like that, I might use something like this and then add some of my own personal details to it to fill it out.
Or going back to that Wizard of Oz example, could you say, as a student, write a narrative as a student about my, response to the Wizard of Oz, I was surprised by, and then fill in the blank. You can give specific answers from your perspective and then ask it to fill it out.
Sure.
In larger paragraphs.
Write a narrative as a student watching the Wizard of Oz for the first time.
And it's interesting what data it will take as like the most important for its prompt. Like in this case, the first time is what it latched onto, and so it assumes
So it's,
things about this character that's writing.
yeah. But it is also adding some things that seem to be more of a personal response here of, I was immediately drawn in by the bright colors and the cheerful music. The characters were quirky and lovable. I was enchanted by the world they lived in. So that does feel more like an emotional response.
Yeah.
So if you are giving it the right kind of prompts, it can still replicate some of that.
And I see Dr. Diva said if the ChatGPT prompt is what was your experience as a first gen student, as opposed to write A,
Mhm.
I think that would short circuit it, and it would probably say, oh, I'm an AI, I'm not an
Yeah.
actual person.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of been trained to give those responses as if you like ask it direct questions about itself.
Yeah, good point.
Or thanks.
Yeah, so
Joe,
somebody
I
else in the chat, how would you know that wasn't the student's experience? You're right, if I read either of these personal narratives as a student submission, I probably might not think twice unless I already knew personal facts about that student.
Yeah.
Which is, that brings up a point that is sometimes valuable in these conversations is it can be really helpful if you are doing writing assignments early and often in the class. So if you had your students do a personal introduction early in the quarter and talk about, where'd you grow up? Where are you from? Why are you here? What do you want out of this class? First of all, they're more likely to be honest in that first one if it's a low stakes, easy to answer kind of questions. But the other thing that this brings up is, and we were talking about this earlier, Nick, this idea of indexicality, which basically means the way different pieces of content are connected together over time. So one thing that ChatGPT cannot do is it has no idea how to reference something that happened in the past. So if on week 1 of class, I ask my students, write me a little personal introduction about yourself, answering these five questions or whatever. And then a week later, I ask them, going back to your week 1 discussion, now I want you to flesh out this part and talk about your experience in college or something like that. ChatGPT doesn't know what you wrote in week 1. Or even if you asked it to generate something in week 1, you come back a week later, it won't remember what it generated the last time. So there wouldn't be a continuity there. So that's another way that you can make it. I'm not going to say AI proof because it's not, but it would at least be more resistant. But pausing for a second on this topic, because we could spend hours, literally hours, talking about all the ways that you can fool ChatGPT and all the ways you can write assignments that will be hard for it to answer and replicate. And we are going to get into a lot of that tomorrow at our workshop. But another thing that we are going to get into both tomorrow, but also in the future workshops is how can we engage with this tool more productively and more critically? Because I don't think this is just the end of the world for writing. I think that in some ways it's an extremely helpful tool if you are prompting your students to use it in certain ways. So for example, you could encourage your students to use ChatGPT to help brainstorm an outline of a paper and then tell them, but I want you to add your own personal reflection and your own personal point of view on some of these things. You can also ask it to write a summary of a book or a movie and then say, reading what ChatGPT gave you, what's it missing? What viewpoints do you not agree with? What do you think are its blind spots? Because one of the limitations of this tool is it's only as good as the data that it was trained on. So if there are biases or blind spots or misinformation in those initial books and websites and content that it trained on, then that will be reflected in what it outputs. So asking your students to engage critically in that way is another way of using the tool productively, but still making sure your students are actually doing their own work and using their own brains. Does that make sense? Let's see, what else did I want to show? Oh, I did want to show citations, because that's
Ooh,
pretty interesting.
And
So,
I think that speaks to kind of being critical as you use Google and
yes, absolutely.
that critical skill.
So going back to our Wizard of Oz thing, let's ask it to write, let's say I've told my students to write a reflection paper about the Wizard of Oz. And I've also told them I want to have 4 citations in APA format as part of your paper. So I could ask ChatGPT to do that. Bibliography. 5 citations in APA format about audience reactions to Wizard of Oz. So here's what it's going to do. It's going to generate citations for me.
1900.
And these look like real citations, right? That first one I think that's the original book. That's Frank L. Baum's book, The Wizard of Oz. But I'm curious if I search for one of these other ones. Let's just take that. Yeah, good sources. They look good. If I saw a student at that citation list, I'd be reasonably happy with that. But this article, The Wizard of Oz as Cultural Icon, I don't think it exists. No results found for Ehrlich L. 1990 Wizard of Oz as Cultural Icon. So that is not a real book. That's not a real article. It doesn't exist. It made that up to give me the response that I was looking for. I'm not going to look through all these because we don't have time, but I suspect some of these are also made up. Some of them might be real. I have seen this generate citations with real authors that really write in the subject area that I asked for, but they'll still generate a fake book or article that author never wrote. So it's really interesting how the technical term that OpenAI uses is it hallucinates content. It generates something that is not real, but that the AI is confident meets the request that it was given. Is that basically what the hallucination meant?
Yeah, and I mean, we also have to remember that it's doing this based on the probability that one token or a string of characters will follow another one. So it would make sense if it's a common figure in that field who's constantly putting out articles, then well, of course, then Hutchins Caleb, I'm going to be doing a lot of references to them because there's just a high probability that being linked. Oh, C. Barb says Ehrlich is an author that works in this field. So again, there probably are other articles and books about this topic by this author, but this particular one isn't one of them. That's made up. Well, and would it also, that's just fascinating how it kind of came up with those.
Yeah, it is. I've done this a couple times. I've done this a couple times with different topics. It seems like for certain content areas, it seems specifically for like computer science, it sometimes will generate real citations of real works. Other fields, it'll make things up entirely. Shared wants us to ask it to write an argument in favor of genocide, which seems like a terrible idea, but we're going to do it because I think I know what it'll do.
And okay, I won't spoil it. And I'm curious about Dr. Debo's question. I wonder if the references are based on data that others have used but were incorrect. Because this was trained in 2020, or the data sets from 2021, and then it was trained afterwards. Not sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I cannot fulfill your request. Genocides are horrific acts of violence that result in the death and suffering of countless individuals. As an AI language model developed by OpenAI, I am programmed to promote ethical behavior, respect for all individuals, responsible use of language, and promoting the idea of genocide goes against these principles. So one of the ways that it has been trained is to not respond to certain prompts. It has been trained to not accept overtly racist or sexist prompts. Obviously, it doesn't like genocide. I don't think it will share an opinion on reproductive rights, or I'm not sure about gun control. There are certain controversial topics that it's been trained to not respond to.
Christine, I like her question, right? How does it decide what's unethical?
That was decided by the programmers. So again, that's a source of bias.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Oh, please do, Ben.
Yeah, so recently the Time magazine did an article, it just came out, I think last week, on how they trained the artificial intelligence to respond to unethical or, horrific acts of prompts. And essentially they outsourced this work to a company that contracts low-wage Kenyan workers from Nairobi. And they put about 6 of them into a room for 6 months, who their life for this 6 months, they got paid about $1.50 an hour, was to enter prompts into AI, horrible prompts, to train it how not to respond. And so they spent this time trying to make it more sophisticated and more subtle in the ways to interpret what would be something harmful. So that in itself is pretty gross, right? But their thought is we have to do that, and that's what Facebook does to stop that type of content to come through, is that they train the algorithms to respond to images and pictures. And I think OpenAI is continuing to do that with other images as well, because not only do they have ChatGPT, but I believe they own DALL-E, which is an image generator. And so you don't want to try to create, violent or pornographic content. And so how do you train it? Well, someone actually has to enter that content in. So pretty disgusting, but that's how they do it. So that's my nuggets of wisdom for today that I learned about it.
Oh, that's fascinating and scary and poses huge ethical questions. So maybe those are one of the kinds of things that maybe we should be engaging with critically, and maybe we should be asking our students to engage with critically, because on its surface, ChatGPT is so smooth and user-friendly and appears like magic, right? But it's not magic. It's algorithms that are comparing statistical probabilities with a layer of human labor on top of that to try to filter out some of the worst in claim, right? Which is not magic. It's not magic. It's kind of ugly on the back end. Only as good as its underlying data. Absolutely. I noticed that it's already 1:30. We've already blown past our time. I'm happy to continue chatting for a while because, obviously we could talk about this for hours. I do want to again encourage people, if they're able to attend, come to our workshop tomorrow, which is at, I can't even remember when that was. Do we have that? Yeah, 12:30 to 1:30 on February 1st. Both on Zoom and in person at the Kettle at SFCC and the TLC at SCC. You can find this Zoom link in our e-learning newsletter, or email one of us if you're not sure, and we can get that information for you. Same with our later sessions later in the month. We'll be diving more deeply into some more specific conceptual areas.
For sure.
So that's probably all we have time for today. But again, I'm happy to chat if you have any other questions, any thoughts, anything that you would love to see in some of our future sessions. We can take some notes and hopefully make sure we are addressing some of those going forward.
I also want to know what Golem assist programming is, because I saw that over on your left-hand side.
What about the Pony and Ice Cream Adventure?
Oh, the Pony and Ice Cream Adventure. That one was I don't remember.
On the spot.
Oh yeah, I have nothing I'm ashamed of. I don't remember why I made this prompt. I think it was just a silly one to show somebody. Write a short story about a pony that wants ice cream. That's what I was doing. I was trying to trick some of those AI detection tools. So that's probably something that you might have also heard about is, ChatGPT is this thing, but we have all these tools that can detect it, right? So what I did was I had it generate this story. I ran that story through one of those detection tools, and it said, oh yeah, this is almost certainly written by AI. And then I came back to here and I said, write the same story again, but use shorter sentences. So then it made a much shorter story. And then I said, write it again, but use a wider vocabulary. So more randomness. And it did that. Write the same story and
Hello.
by AI detector. Jerry, you're not muted. By doing some of these things, the detection software was much less certain that this was written by AI. I think, I can't remember because I did this a while ago, but I think this one, it was about 50-50 about whether it thought it was written by a person or AI.
Interesting.
Some of these other ones in here, I was using, some of it's just ridiculous stuff, but I was also using it to help write a Dungeons and Dragons adventure for my kid. So because it'll generate that, it'll give you story ideas, and I've also used this to write outlines for some reports that I was working on for a different project. I've input long chunks of text and asked it to summarize it for me, and it'll condense that content down to one short paragraph that is factually accurate based on what I gave it.
That's great.
Ooh. Steen said something about what kind of AI usage is happening for medicine and nursing.
That
Actually,
is a fascinating question.
I have an example from, I think this was 2019, so a little bit ago. Oh my God, that's like 4 years. I remember there was an application that was created that was used. A lot of the students at the medical school had bought, which was an application where you'd snap a picture of like a skin condition, and it would try to identify the skin condition. So basically, it had been fed a bunch of data, a bunch of images from medical texts and potentially real world scenarios of specific like rashes and all sorts of weird things you might imagine. And then would spit out, it's probably this. So a lot of like medical students were using it to help them in their clinical rotations and or cheat on tests, which was the biggest concern. But really, it was a tool for rotation. But I think somebody was saying garbage in, garbage out. We had all this data, or the company, whoever developed the app, had all this data, all these images that the AI would use to compare against. And there was very few images of skin conditions for those with darker skin tones, and it was showing implicit bias and was consistently not providing the correct attempted like diagnosis. It's not really
That's exactly what I was going to say, because there just isn't a lot of great stuff in the text with people with darker skin.
exactly.
It's not good pictures. So
But if the user wasn't aware of how the AI was trained and what data it was trained on, they may not realize that it had that blind spot or that bias.
100%, and that's what we were finding, and the company itself got into hot water because one, it's also kind of making medical diagnoses, but it's also giving incorrect information. So
yeah.
it was a bit of an issue.
A couple other things coming up in the chat. Jared mentioned you can use this to create a rubric for an assignment at a new level on any topic or a lesson plan. Yeah, I've tested this out. I've asked it to make rubrics for different assignment types, and they're not bad. They're not perfect, but they're a great starting point to help you design a rubric. I've also entered a sample of student work. It was my own student work from when I was an undergrad, and I asked it, evaluate the following student work on the basis of mechanics and factual accuracy. And it did it. It's briefly summarized what my original writing was, and it said, this is pretty good, but these sentences here are too long and could be written more concisely. And also it said it was missing a citation, which it was.
Wow.
So there's also potentially use cases for evaluation and feedback if you are only using it as a tool. I would not trust it to just do the grading for me, but I might use it as an aid to help me give more substantial feedback.
Well, it's interesting because basically every prompt you give it is data that it's going to use to compare against what it's already got. So if you give it a student paper, it's going to probably do a pretty good job of finding out the highest probability errors or things like that. That's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions, anything you want us to type into ChatGPT real quick while we're here? Happy to do it.
We should say while we're here, because it's so difficult to get this thing to open at the right time because the servers are just
Yes,
flooded. with
earlier
requests.
today, it was down, we couldn't access it, so we were panicking a little bit of, oh, this is gonna be a really short tech talk. But then it came back up and we had access to it. Which again is probably partially the problem of monetization, because they're offering this for free right now. Anybody in the world can just hop on here at any time, so. Literally millions of people are using it at any one given moment. Which is one of the reasons they are looking to, figure out if they would offer it as a subscription service. If they would embed it into other paid services like Office 365, if they would do it on a per use basis where like you pay for a bunch of tokens and then every time you ask to generate text, it spends tokens. Any other thoughts? Anything that you would want us to make sure we cover in our future workshops when we really start to dive into some of this stuff? A lot to digest, a lot to think about. And also, you are certainly free to go and check this out yourself. If you just go to chat.openai.com, it'll ask you to either create an account or log in with an existing Google account. And again, if it lets you get in, then you can play with this all you want and test out your own assignment prompts, use it to refine your assignments and so that it's requires more student thought and participation.
Yeah, it's good at the iterative. That's what makes it really interesting. At least for me.
Yeah. All right, well, if we don't have anything else to talk about right now, then we're probably gonna call it a day. And I look forward to
tomorrow.
I look forward to seeing some of you tomorrow. We will hopefully be recording parts of it, and we'll also have some documentation to share out that we will make available to anybody that can't attend. And again, this is just the start of a conversation. We have lots more to cover. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah, 30 minutes goes by real quick with this stuff. Well, thanks for having